I think of myself as a filmmaker, and I got into an argument once at a film conference with George Cukor, who's really doesn't like the word filmmaker. I mean, he likens it to toy maker. And I think that's a real nice thing. I like being thought of as a toy maker that makes films. And that's how I got into it, is I was fascinated with the mechanics of it. I mean, you know, coming out of cars and what have you, I was fascinated with the fact that you could take real life and put it onto an image and make it move, and you could manipulate it.
Real life.
With it.
Real life.
Whatever you were to photograph.
Why didn't you tell me? You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
This is the 1st of November, 1994. Today is my first day of writing the new Star Wars series. Took my kids to school this morning. My oldest daughter was sick all night. I got no sleep whatsoever. This is my life. This is the hole I live in, the cave I hibernated. I have beautiful, pristine yellow tablets, ready to go. Fresh blocks of pencils. I'm all set. All I need is an idea.
First day of principal photography on episode 1.
Good luck, everybody. Now let's kick ass. 77, take 1.
When George first told me about the fact that he wanted to change the way movies were made, I didn't quite understand that.
There were things about George that I found mystifying as an actor.
George is talking us through, and there he goes. It looks like he's not seeing anything. He's so in his head, but you can see in his eyes what he already sees as the finished product.
This is going to be the first time I go back and try to do a movie of this scale with this much intensity. It starts with me sitting here doodling in my little binder, but it ends up with a couple thousand people working together in a very, very intense, emotional, creative way to pull it off.
And I got very intrigued with the idea of how you build a society. It was all done by stories, mythology, heroes. When you bring new things into a society, you can either use it for good or you can use it for evil. I've learned to live with the fact that everything can't be the way you want it to be. You have to sort of do the best you can and move forward.
The first time I saw Star Wars was on a widescreen laserdisc. This was before the special edition DVDs were released, with all the subtle, less than subtle, and quite obvious changes. This is how my perspective on Star Wars was created. I'm sure that other people have a similar story of their own. At the time I first watched the movie and its sequels, the franchise was built on what has come to be known as the original trilogy. Video games, books, and comics were the main medium that expanded the universe of Star Wars, exploring the stories of Luke Skywalker, his friends, foes, and the galaxy's conflicts. The franchise in the 1990s was known to me as noble bright science fiction, but with a gritty, dingy, and grimy environment. A fantasy in a realistic environment, with the quirk of it taking place in a long-lost age, somewhere out there in space.
Somewhere in space. This may all be happening right now.
Star Wars was a mythic narrative in the form of a sequential space drama, with alternative takes and stories that took place in the extended and expanded universe. This atmosphere was created with state-of-the-art techniques for the time, but times change. In 1981, the audience in the cinema that saw The Empire Strikes Back for the first time was shown a title crawl declaring that Empire Strikes Back was actually Episode 5. This was perplexing because it seemed to be out of sequential order. Wasn't the original Star Wars Episode 1?
This really is conceived as a 6-part movie, of which Episode 1 is the first chapter. And sometimes it's difficult to keep that in mind, that each film, while it's important in itself and relates to what's going on in that film and has to be entertaining in itself, really is fitting into a larger mosaic. And that the whole enterprise won't really be understood, I think, until you can actually sit down and watch all 6 episodes and then follow the story, because we're dealing in micro stories here. The larger picture is kind of a different story.
Until the announcement of The Phantom Menace in 1998, the question of the missing episodes would remain a topic of conversation amongst fans, wildly speculating on what its contents would consist of. At the time the original trilogy was made, digital effects were rudimentary. Visuals had to be created by physical means. Effects were made using in-camera, analog, and handmade techniques. In 1977, the available technology for producing science fiction and fantasy effects were limited to things like matte paintings, miniatures, puppets, rotoscoping, stop-motion animation, and basic compositing.
We were building an entire system from the beginning to the end. Cameras were being built at the same time, the miniatures were being built at the same time, the stage technology was going to be built. It all had to come together to make the first piece of film.
A matte painting is a painted piece of scenery that goes together with actors on a location, on a set.
I met Al Miller and Jerry Jeffers, and they had built a very early motion control system to move the camera around the miniature and to be able to repeat the moves. I got together with them and we conceived the motion control systems for Star Wars, because most of the images were built up of multiple elements. We'd do mats on one pass, we'd do engines on another pass, and the camera had to be able to duplicate the move exactly, precisely, so that when we put those elements together in the sandwich we call optical printing, all of the pieces were in sync with one another.
An optical printer is this giant machine. It's taking multiple pieces of film and running through this process, all lined up and pushed together like this. It's not 2 pieces, it's multiple pieces of film, multiple pieces of mats that have been created to combine images of a background plate and a foreground image. All kinds of things that have to all be sandwiched into this machine and run through one single frame at a time. And it's being rephotographed.
It's fairly easy to mat a rocket ship over star fields because it's mostly black anyway, and you wouldn't see a matte line, frankly. There's sim shots that did have a few matte lines in Star Wars.
We're doing a lot more stop motion, which is difficult, and we're experimenting more and more with video and computer technology to try to advance the art of film and to make it easier to express yourself.
Costumes, props, pyrotechnics, music and sound effects, and of course the camera itself were the only tools on hand to create the world of Star Wars.
2 tons of clay and 600 pounds of latex to form Jabba's Incredible Hulk.
All of this was built with care and detail at an unreasonable rate to make the story of Star Wars exist as a window into a realized world. Techniques and equipment, like the special effects cameras used for the miniature shots, had to be rebuilt, converted, or built entirely from scratch to employ new ways of doing things. Star Wars not only had a deep bag of tricks, they made up some new ones that defined how things are done to this very day. These techniques, by the mid to late 90s, when the prequels were being conceived, were augmented with CGI, nonlinear editing, and other digital advances.
A lot of shots were traveling at tremendous speed, and at the beginning of a shot, something that's way on the far end, way out on the horizon, would be going past camera. So it either meant tremendously large miniatures or helicopter plates, but exotic terrains that George wanted didn't really exist anywhere. That really leaves computer graphics of some kind as about the only real solution.
Many of these techniques were developed in part by George's company, Industrial Light and Magic. The digital side of these developments started in earnest shortly after the original trilogy was complete. Lucasfilm Digital went from being able to create basic shapes and sequences like the Star Trek Genesis sequence from Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, to liquid simulation, complex reflections, the development of Pixar, and ultimately most of the tools in our post-production toolboxes. ILM and their CGI isn't the only thing Lucas built during and after Star Wars that changed how films were made. Lucas took the initiative to create Edit Droid, the world's first non-linear editing system.
I was very tired of going through bins looking for 3 frames that had been cut off, asking the assistant to get me a piece of film, and it made it so you'd take forever to cut a film, and I was too impatient for that. So we started building these digital editing systems. There was no equipment, so we had to build a system around the equipment, but it was all digital.
Now we could access video randomly because we had a disc instead of a tape.
This system was the springboard for the Avid editing system, and other iterations on the concept owned today by Adobe and Apple.
And eventually we sold the system to Avid.
If you make videos in any editing software, you have directly benefited from George Lucas's ideas and investments. Pixar, arguably one of the greatest 3D animation studios of all time, was originally part of Lucasfilm before being sold off and replaced due to creative differences on what the material should be.
We'd reached the point where we could do something with computer graphics in the films. We could do image compositing, painting, touch-up, all on the computer.
Lucasfilm programmed its image-making know-how into computer chips. The result, a special purpose machine called Pixar.
The computer division, at that time, we were actually trying to make these animated short films. So what we were doing was not relevant to what they were doing in their minds.
Ed Catmull was hell-bent to make cartoons, and so he hired John Lasseter to come in and put him in the closet, and they were making these little cartoons to prove that they could do it.
In the 6 years that I was at Lucasfilm, every one of the projects that we started or got started on the technological path they needed to be on. But it was clear that the goals weren't entirely lined up.
Once I felt I had all the tools I needed, then I sold Pixar. I knew they wanted to be a cartoon company.
Their dream was to make an animated feature. And I said, great, but to do this on a grand scale, it's going to take at least, $30, $40 million investment, which we don't have.
Lucas wanted to create realistic objects, characters, and effects for use in live-action productions, while many of the Pixar team wanted to make their animations entirely within a CGI environment.
After I did Star Wars, I decided that I would begin to move into the world of computer animation. We had made this computer-controlled motion control camera, but I really wanted to get to the next level. I had a lot of ideas that couldn't be conquered in the traditional film technology.
This difference of creative opinion is not just limited to the creatives, but defines a stark difference in audience expectations and the cinematic experience they are partaking in. The point of saying all of this is to show that between the start of the original trilogy and the start of the prequels, George was not complacent. He was very busy. But he was not just busy, he was biding his time. The main reason he wasn't making the prequel movies is not even business. It was because he was raising his children. Instead of being consumed by the nature of writing and directing movies, he was able to develop filmmaking systems, companies, and be with his family all at the same time, with regular hours and without the need to travel to places like Tunisia, or the stress of deadlines and the interference of studios who he always resented for their lack of understanding, their lack of expertise, and their lack of vision. These are most likely the reasons for why he decided to leave Star Wars for a time, but the reason to return, I believe, is specific and can be pinned down to a single event. A motion picture event of the year. That reason is Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park shocked and astounded audiences with both its practical and digital effects. ILM was at the center of it all. The movie proved one thing to Lucas. It proved that a fully realized three-dimensional digital creature would be accepted by general audiences. Phil Tippett, one of the stop-motion animators at ILM, was originally slated to use his go-motion technique to do the dinosaur work in Jurassic Park. This was the case until Spielberg was shown what ILM's digital division had been working on.
And I had always kind of thought, well, I mean, yeah, the computer's great for these hallucinogenic things, but good luck doing a living, breathing creature. until he showed me the final shot that they were going to show Spielberg. And it was like, whoops. Okay.
This displeased Phil to a great degree, and to compromise between the two systems, the animators would use Phil's go-motion animation as the basis for the animations they would create. When you watch Jurassic Park, you are watching a marriage of the old and the new, and for audiences in 1993, it was something they had never seen before. George was always unable to get what he wanted in Star Wars. It is a consistent saying that George's vision for Star Wars was limited by resources, technology, and time. He wanted more in, but couldn't get it polished the way that he wanted it to be.
He used to say that he only got about 25% of what he had in his mind on screen with Star Wars, which, you know, of course, was shocking as hell to me because that looked like 100% to me, but not George.
And when I made it, and with ILM and with everything else, you know, by the time I got done, I said, this is, you know, like 25% of what I wanted.
Tell me about that first script. Now, did you try to tell the whole story in one script?
Well, at that point, it wasn't the whole story. I wrote a script, and the script was very ambitious. It told a very large story. And when I finished it, I realized that it was way too big to make into a movie. So I took the first part of it, sort of the first act, and I said, I'll make the movie about this. And I had to expand on it and move it around, play with it a little bit. But I basically then focused on that as being the film. And I said, someday, if I ever get a chance, maybe I'll make these other things, the rest of it, the other 2/3 into a movie. But right now, that's just gonna have to go on the shelf, and I'll leave it there. And so that's really how the first project came to pass. The other part of it is in order to write that first script, I had to write a backstory about where Darth Vader came from, how the kids evolved, you know, his wife, how Ben related to all that, how the Emperor came to power. And that ended up being the basis for the projects that I'm working on now.
With the computer-generated imagery his own company was capable of, now maybe he could.
The cast of Star Wars makes an 18th attempt to escape from the Death Star.
Okay, cut. Cut it.
And.
The mic was in frame.
The mic was in picture.
Oh.
The mic was in picture.
The
mic was in picture.
Everyone back to first position.
The sound department has to pay up.
He always said things like, if I could wave my magic wand, I would put electrodes in my head and have the movie made right there.
I can see all the Scotch tape and the rubber bands and everything holding it together. But that's how movies get made. They don't get made right, they get made the best possible way under the circumstances. I wanted to get it my way, and I didn't have the time or the money to do it.
I wanted to give a kind of random, real-world feel to everything. So I wanted to do some things that weren't predictable, like having stormtroopers ride on dewbacks. If you were to think about it very long, you would think, well, they'd be riding, you know, mechanized machines and things like that. But the idea was that there was a creature like a dewback that existed in the desert, you know, like a lizard, that was very adaptable to the desert and was actually much better in terms of maintenance and upkeep than a machine, which the sand would get into, and you know, it was very expensive to keep those machines going out there in the middle of the desert, where the dewbacks are very cheap to run, and they last a lot longer.
The first thing that we had to do was build geometry that was going to represent certain parts of the scene. For example, the dewback that the artist Harold Whitlack designed. We can see in this three-dimensional modeling program that we have front, top, and side views and a camera view of what this creature is going to look like. This will allow the computer to calculate what each surface of this creature is going to look like from different camera angles. The next step was to bring the elements, the 3D model elements into a three-dimensional animation rendering program. And in that, we can set up virtual lights, virtual cameras, and virtual objects to duplicate what would happen on a real set. You can see that it's extremely rough here, and it goes into more and more refined stages of animation.
At the beginning, you don't know what the answers are. You just know that's a problem. And I didn't even know what all the problems were.
Well, the first problem to be solved was how to describe an object to the computer. The simplest way to do that is to just draw it off on graph paper. This is just a cross-sectional view of one-half a simple cup shape, and a computer can then spin this around to make a surface of revolution of what it would look like from different views. Now, this sort of picture is made of an array of little spots on the screen, which are called pixels.
With digital manipulation, the fact is that now the visual effects artist has at his disposal millions of addressable pixels. You can address each point in the frame, and because of that, nothing is impossible.
And thus, George started writing scripts almost immediately after Jurassic Park was released, and more importantly, successfully received. To this day, they're still cranking out CGI dinosaur movies. What George did with the prequels was take this bleeding-edge technology created by his own employees and use it to create a new trilogy of films. He would not have to engage with the studios on any creative level.
I don't think the system works.
How would you have it work?
We need a system where the politicians sit down and discuss the problem, agree what's in the best interest of all the people, and then do it.
That's exactly what we do. The trouble is that people don't always agree.
Well, then they should be made to.
By whom? Who's gonna make them?
I don't know. Someone.
You?
Of course not me.
But someone.
Someone wise.
The real problem now is that stranglehold that the distributors and the exhibitors have over the filmmaker, because that's the only way you can make any money back to recoup your costs of making the production.
Right.
And as long as they have that stranglehold, we're just gonna keep, trying to get things done and never get them done.
Of course, he would have to do some deal-making to get the rights in order, but at the end of the day, the prequels would be a George Lucas film, and he would have the final cut.
The last thing Lucas wanted to do was line the pockets of executives and make studios even more powerful. He remained as contemptuous as ever of studios and the studio mentality. They're rather sleazy, unscrupulous people, he groused to Rolling Stone about studio execs. They don't care about people. It is incredible the way they treat filmmakers because they have no idea what making a movie is about. George looked at it like a businessman, saying, wait a minute. The studios borrowed money, took a 35% distribution fee off the top. This is crazy. Why don't we borrow the money ourselves? So some of the bravest and/or most reckless acts were not aesthetic, but financial.
In this scheme, he could pay for the development of the technology by making movies that had a guaranteed audience and would in theory benefit the industry, even if he thought the big studios wouldn't get it. This wouldn't be that far away from the spirit of how the original trilogy was made, in theory. The technology and the creativity of the people involved defined what was possible in 1977. Why would the 90s be that different?
We have 100 years of experience basically shooting on film, and film is still around. No matter what George Lucas said, that film is dead, and he said that 30 years ago. And film is not dead because people still like to shoot on film because it really has an incredibly beautiful look.
Who cares, 20 years from now, they won't be saying it looks like film. They'll be saying, look at what I can do with my digital.
What the prequels represent in the history of effects technology, at least in my view, is a sort of end of the physical era and a beginning of a digital era, in terms of what studios prioritize to generate their imagery. Since the prequels, the advances George and his team made have become industry standards. LED arrays power virtual sets, and all sorts of post-production tools are readily available to do all of the things that were experimental in the 1990s when George needed them.
You can be anywhere in the world. So if you want to be in Iceland one day and you want to be in the desert the next, you can literally change between those locations with a button click.
And this is without mentioning how movies have to compete with the internet, streaming, or how AI could change how society views media in general. Everything in business is built on the state of the art, and ILM and Lucasfilm had an enormous amount of talent carefully watched over by a renegade maverick of filmmaking whose conception of the world was far beyond genre film. Lucas stands as a massive figure in film history, but even that perception of him as a great film entrepreneur is a mere shadow of the bright light bulb that floated above his head, or the complex vision that abided within.
This one, a long time have I watched. All his life has he looked away to the future, to the horizon, never his mind on where he was, what he was doing. Adventure, excitement. A Jedi craves not these things. You are reckless.
So was I, if you remember.
George in the 1990s was guiding cinema towards the future, and he wanted to be one of the first to use it for his own purposes. It was simple. It was the way of the future.
One of the problems I had with Yoda is that, for instance, is that he couldn't move more than 6 feet in any one thing, and I couldn't show his legs. So I couldn't show him in a wide shot, and I couldn't show him running, jumping, or walking, really, any distance. We had to sort of rig backpacks and things to make him, to be able to transport him places. Now I can make him move anywhere I want. It's a great asset to be able to have a lot of the creatures that couldn't move before be able to move. So I hopefully will be able to get closer to what I am putting down on the page and what I imagine things to be like.
What was celebrated in 2009 with the release of Avatar, with its complex CGI world and performance capture techniques, is founded on top of the work that Spielberg, Lucas, Cameron, and even Ron Howard were doing with ILM in the 80s and 90s. It's simply impossible to look at modern filmmaking and not see Lucas's hand somewhere in the history of the technology being used. For the prequels, George first shot The Phantom Menace mostly on film because there weren't digital cinema cameras like the Sony Venice or the Arri Alexa.
While Lucas had initially intended to shoot the film digitally, the available technology, to his disappointment, wasn't yet advanced enough for him to fill the entire movie in an acceptable widescreen format. Lucas would shoot a few scenes digitally anyway as a kind of test run, recording some sequences on digital high-definition tape, which would then need to be recorded back to film to be shown in theaters. Watching the footage later, Lucas was convinced he would never shoot on film again. Nevertheless, despite his earlier boast that his digital backlot would make it possible to shoot the movie for around $50 million, costs had escalated rapidly throughout pre-production and continued to climb right on through filming. But Lucas, who in the past had begged studio executives for the money he needed to finish a film, vowed not to scrimp when it came to financing his own movie, no matter the cost.
Film is cumbersome, so I just said, I'm going to take my money and my time, I'm going to fix it. And we went to Sony and we said, we would like to help you, work with you to build a digital camera.
He was bound and determined that Star Wars Episode 2 is going to be shot digitally. And we need to get that all worked out and get a pipeline figured out for doing full-on production with digital cameras.
In 2002, we did Attack of the Clones. It was the first major feature that was shot high definition.
What George did on the Star Wars movie was take an experimental HD camera and apply it to a feature film paradigm. That was unthinkable at the time. It meant that he went around the entire film community, but it more deeply meant that he went around film itself. It became a really, really polarizing time for a lot of people in Hollywood.
I got up and had a big meeting saying that I was the devil incarnate. I was going to destroy the industry. I was going to destroy all their jobs. That you know, this is inferior. That he says he shot Attack of the Clones digitally, but he didn't. We have word that he actually used film cameras, that he's not shooting digital. He's lying to everybody.
George was one of the first filmmakers ever to shoot major motion pictures on digital cinema cameras, and it was only possible because he requested the engineers make those cameras deliver him an image at 1080p and at 24 frames a second.
After careful review of the small bit of digital footage he had shot during The Phantom Menace, about 6 minutes worth of lightsaber duels, Lucas was convinced that digital footage would be just as clear and stable as film. In some cases, in fact, it was even clearer, requiring digitally shot footage to be lit differently in order to soften hard edges between objects in the foreground and the background. Making everything look right and work properly required special cameras and lenses, which Sony and Panavision obligingly delivered.
The lineage of these cameras goes directly from George Lucas and the prequels through movies like Tron Legacy all the way to current-day hits like Top Gun Maverick, which uses the Venice system. Without the F900 and later the F-35, this might have worked out differently. The prequel movies feature a myriad of digital effects in a quantity and quality never before seen. Virtual, anthropomorphic characters walk around with live-action actors. You see, Jar Jar Binks would never have existed if George hadn't seen the same technology work with Jurassic Park. Backgrounds and entire locations in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith are blue screen and green screen environments with very few real elements. Matte paintings of the bygone age, made by the old Disney masters, were replaced with 3D digital imagery, which allowed more flexibility and alteration in the post-production process. Entire sections of sets could be added on in post where they didn't exist before. George could film a scene at one time of day and then have ILM change the time of day based on the mood he was looking for in the scene.
It was an extremely difficult sequence to color correct. In other words, to get the colors right. We didn't really have the time to set up properly because we had changed the sequence from a night sequence to a day sequence.
Multiple takes were blended and composited together in post-production in response to George seeing things he did or didn't like, using morph cuts that ILM had invented and tested in the movie Willow.
We coined the word morph for doing this, morphing from one shape into another. Everybody else since has been spelling it M-O-R-P-H, and they're all wrong. Even the dictionary's wrong. It's actually M-O-R-F.
He started doing a lot of editorial comps where he would take this actor from this plate and put him in that plate, and I'm going to drop out this line of dialogue, so just morph it together. And
So what I want to do is, we'll leave this for the time being. We'll create this other shot, and then if this other shot works, we'll come back to this shot, take Banaka, slip him out of sync so he doesn't start to move. So he just is standing there. Okay?
You've got character A talking to character B over the shoulder, and you could cut out between them and use different takes that were not the takes that they actually talk to each other, because you might prefer a response from somebody or a hand gesture or something or a blink differently.
During the production of episode 1, George was often encouraging me to do things that I thought were marginal or ill-advised.
John Knoll's great. He was the visual effects person on my left. And he would sit there and do, shots and things. He would just do them on his little laptop. And all it did in the end is gained him a whole lot of heartache.
You'd go in and you'd do the best job of it you can.
There were still physical elements in these pictures, especially in The Phantom Menace. What I am trying to bring attention to is that the decisions that Lucas made 20 years ago that seemed radical, extreme, and risky are done so routinely that nowadays pictures are made in pieces all over the world by multiple international vendors, only to be glued together in the final edit. Whether or not you like how film in the literal sense has become digital video, George was right about having a pragmatic, progressive attitude with the technology he was developing. He knew people of all creative visual endeavors would want to use this technology developing under his companies, regardless of how far out it sounded at the time. And you know what? He was right about that. But he was also wrong about another thing. Sometimes you can't fix what you have in post.
Hey, you guys. What if the movie sucks?
There's always a challenge of how far I could go in the film before it, would be silly.
Howard! Ruffle showed you these photos, then you killed Walt Jr. for messing around with your wife. Goes again. I gave no... Run!
Harry, kill the revolver. We got people under there.
Listen, I'm called.
Gotta go down here.
Oh, let me go, please. I'm pulling. Henderson, turn it in. Hey, Henderson. Oh, Henderson, turn it.
There's always a challenge of how far I could go in the film before it, would be silly. How much fun I could have without it destroying the credibility of the movie. And the approach I took on the film was pretty much similar to what I had done on American Graffiti, which is kind of realistic but humorous approach to the characters so that they could have fun and be kind of lighthearted in rather intense situations, and have that be amusing in itself without sort of winking at the camera and winking at the movie and saying this is all just a big joke.
Oh, go.
By having the characters at least take it seriously.
Don't do that again.
James Bond had created a kind of film that's roughly in this vein, but had much more self-consciousness about what it was doing.
You must have followed us.
I think you got the point.
We're sort of in the same genre, but I wanted to be a subtler, to set the tone that could create enough tension and be exciting for everybody, but still be fun enough to kind of enjoy as a movie, but then not have parents sort of say, I don't want to go see this movie, say this is too childish for me. So I was trying to walk that tight line that I had successfully walked in American Graffiti. I was hoping I could do again here.
There's something very rewarding about cracking a scene with other actors and shooting the scene and having achieved it. And with this, you're doing lines against a blue curtain, and it's really hard work. I mean, it's difficult to make that believable. I don't know if I have.
I think blue screen acting is maybe the purest form of acting, because it's like being a little kid in a cardboard box and thinking it's a spaceship. And I mean, that's really the point you have to get to.
We were working with these creatures, and there's a couple of scenes I wanted to be able to focus on where it is, because I think an audience would subconsciously recognize that, I don't have anything else, but credits will do fine.
You're always in a state of having to believe something that's not really there. You're just remembering the lines and saying them, really. Or not remembering the lines and trying to say them, as the case may be. You will not win this time. What's your name, Dooku? I want to say it. Okay.
The big question is, was it right for audiences? The problem is that the original Star Wars trilogy was known for having little to no CGI whatsoever. The physical earthbound reality of the original trilogy's production is a key aesthetic factor, and something that studios and tired filmmakers would rather avoid the trouble of having to suffer through.
An achievement of another kind was the creation of the more human-like droid C-3PO. He and his companion became both dream and nightmare to their creator, George Lucas.
I started writing this. I found the most intriguing thing was to take two robots and make them into human beings and make them the most interesting characters in terms of the comedy element.
They're madmen. They're heading for the prison level. If you hurry, you might catch them. Follow me.
So I wanted to make the film around them, use them as a framework for the film. And I knew when I did that I would be getting myself into a lot of trouble.
R2-D2 didn't really function that well. He could run along in the three-legged position, but he couldn't turn his head at the same time.
And there were wires everywhere. And the head was on a track of ball bearings. I used to grab whatever I could grab a hold of and turn it physically that way and that way, not very far. Because I went too far, the wires would go around my neck.
Putting on the costume for the first time, and within 2 paces, the left leg had shattered down onto the plastic of the left foot and was gently but forcibly and persistently knifing it into the soft part of my foot. So we took it off, and I limped to the set with 1 foot, and it was then I began to panic about the days to come.
Star Wars' lived-in universe of scuffed hallways and dirty buildings was desired by George Lucas in 1977 to make it feel real.
George wanted a used universe. He didn't want that shiny Flash Gordon look.
This is part of why Star Wars' aesthetic is unique, even though it feels typical today. The look of lived-in, spacefaring science fiction was not the norm, but because of Star Wars it is. This goes back to 1968, when George saw how Stanley Kubrick changed the game.
One day we've been standing around Mel's diner, and I said to George, what do you think you want to do next? And he said, well, I like science fiction. The advances Kubrick made, I want to apply that to Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon kinds of movies, like a movie serial. Combine that with 2001 special effects, but the ships go real fast.
Stanley presented a highly realistic commercial and governmental vision of space travel in 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was a depiction of a golden age of exploration in the jet-setting era, where anything seemed possible, and America looked like it was the leader of the world. It was glossy, and its clean aesthetic was created to increase the dissonance of the movie's themes. It was misleading on purpose. George took the technical aspects of how 2001's visuals were made and applied a layer of dirt, grease, some grit, and decided he needed speed to tie it together. This choice created many imitators and inspired some of the greatest science fiction ever made afterwards. Alien, which came out only 2 years later, was directly inspired by the same combination of Star Wars grit and Kubrickian industrial realism. This aesthetic could be said to define modern science fiction ever since. Another aspect of familiar realism that George engaged in is enumerated by the sound designer and editor Ben Burtt.
Ben and his crew collected sounds in the strangest places. These taps on a radio tower's guy wire are part of the sound of a laser pistol being fired. The shearing machine used to cut sheet metal is part of the sound of a snow walker's footstep. A parking meter contributes to the cocking of a laser pistol. Here, Ben Burtt is enhancing the whoosh of a laser sword as it cuts through the air.
George Lucas wanted what he called an organic soundtrack. That is, he wanted the sounds in the film to sound natural. He wasn't interested in perhaps what was the tradition in previous science fiction films, which was to generate electronic sounds and synthesized sounds that would have an otherworldly quality. He wanted the sounds to have a worldly quality, that they would sound like real objects, real motors, actual places. The doors would be rusty on the spaceships or the places where people lived. The engines would sound like that they were maybe mistuned or would backfire once in a while. He wanted a used universe, in a sense. And so by sending me out to record actual acoustic sounds in the everyday world, he was asking me to really gather natural sound which would make this world of fantasy things seem credible and natural.
What I mean by real here is something that looks like it could take place in a real space. This is a fine line to walk, and there's no specific set of rules to follow to create such a world. What is more advisable is avoiding things that obviously break immersion, while strengthening fantastical elements in the story. This can be done by building a rule set around fantastic elements such as magic, speculative science, or other leaps of faith that fully immerse us. The aesthetic techniques of Star Wars are the culmination of the practical, in-camera mentality from the 1900s. The idea therein is that if you want to see something on screen, it has to be captured through the camera. In some sense, what you are seeing is something materially real, and not an approximation generated by code. Whether or not people notice or care is up to them, but pure digital media and pure analog film are distinct from one another. Maybe this won't be the case forever, and maybe you think we already have photorealistic graphics, but at the very least, when the prequels were made, this was not the case. However, this is not to say that computers and digital effects are bad. The original prints of Star Wars have some very rough effects. There are shaky elements, matte lines, color errors, and shots that were not able to be achieved to the level of quality desired. I believe that George released the special editions in 1997 because he felt as though the effects needed to be spruced up, where the old or unpolished physical and optical effects were rough and unbelievable. This would happen right in time to demo the effects and techniques used in the prequels. I'm sure the intention was to create a parity between the two trilogies. In many instances, he was right. However, the addition of CGI creatures and their visual qualities in the updated trilogy can be seen as an example of how the pre-digital and post-digital Star Wars are two different aesthetics that clash with each other to the detriment of the whole.
Hey,
Hey, whoa, just where do you think you're going? Master Luke is your rightful owner now. We'll have no more of this Obi-Wan Kenobi gibberish. And don't talk to me of your mission either. You're fortunate he doesn't blast you into 1,000,000 pieces right here.
Hey, you sir, stop it there!
Hey, yo, Delia, Captain Topos. Misa back.
No, again, Zha Zha. You sir going to the bosses. You sir in big doo-doo this time.
You're making fun of me.
No, I'd be much too frightened.
There are shortcomings to both choices, but what is worse than total practicality or total animation is when both are meant to portray the same reality and do not look like they exist within said reality. One of the major shortcomings of insisting on shooting the prequels with digital cinema cameras was the camera could only record in 1080p. Therefore, there are elements and sequences in the prequels that have to be upscaled for the 4K release. On the other hand, theoretically, Lucasfilm could take the entirety of the prequels and remaster the computer-generated imagery in higher resolution with better detail. It's entirely possible for Lucasfilm to retroactively change every single digital element in the prequels or the special editions that are not up to modern standards if they choose to release another remastered version.
I don't know an artist around that doesn't go back and touch their work up years later if they have the opportunity, especially painters. And of course, theater is that way. Most people go back and either rewrite stuff or repaint stuff or fix it a little bit. The issues are ultimately in terms of society is whether it's okay for other people to go in and start changing things and then still put that artist's name on it.
The sacred Jedi text!
Definitely feels like it's a theme of the series.
You know, say it's a George Lucas film when somebody else has gone in and recut it and changed it and put different music on it. And that's a big issue now. And personally, I think that as long as the artist can continue to have the enthusiasm to refine the work, they should do it. But I don't think that studios or other people should be allowed to go and tamper with something just because they want to put it on television or they want to take it from black and white to color or they want to have a more contemporary score on it.
This is the nonlinear mindset. Of course, by the same token, one could reshoot all of those same digital elements and sequences in the same style as the originals if they were so inclined, but I digress. It is far easier for someone to produce a movie digitally than on film.
I am constantly asked to justify why I want to shoot a film on film. But I don't hear anybody being asked to justify why they want to shoot a film digitally.
Film is a 19th century invention. We are at the top of the photochemical process. This is about as far as it's ever going to go.
Are you done with film?
Don't hold me to it, Keanu, but I think I am.
People speak about, thank God I can see what I'm getting now. I don't have to wait until tomorrow. I can see if it's in focus. I know what I'm getting.
If you're watching a monitor on set and you feel that you're really seeing what you've got, I think you're fooling yourself. The audience is going to watch that film on a screen that is, 1,000 times bigger. You're watching it on a large TV.
Yes, you see what you're getting. It's right there. The problem for me is that I still think you need to see rushes later. I think in order to concentrate with the performances or just the movement, and I still think you need to see them at a special time.
You say, I think we need more backlight. He said, don't worry, it'll look great in dailies. They know as well as anybody that you go to dailies, you say, I really think there should be more backlight in there. But if you do it on the set, you can just stand there and say, no, more backlight.
Okay, cut.
And they do it. They say, okay, no, that's exactly the way I want it, because that's exactly the way it's going to be in the movie theater.
There are a lot of times when CGI is necessary to do things that would otherwise be impossible. I personally find CGI to be less charming and interesting to look at than practical effects, except when the work is exceptional. But we live in a time when the rapid acceleration of technology gives the impression that everything is getting easier to manufacture with less human input needed.
Oh my God, this thing is so old.
And less old-world techniques are required to achieve whatever you wish to achieve. What I'm not arguing is that practical or CGI are better than each other inherently. What I am arguing in the broadest sense is that verisimilitude is the goal of any effect. The old saying holds true: if you notice the effect, it's not working. Regardless of the technique used, the goal should be authenticity. The primary reason why the prequels are visually disappointing is the misguided notion that the movies should be demonstrations of the newest technology, even if it doesn't match the originals or achieve the goals for the era. If a franchise has established itself based on a visual aesthetic sensibility, it is important to consider that when creating more content for it. The visual presentation of a film is an enormous part of what gives it an identity and style. When someone sees a Wes Anderson film or a Stanley Kubrick film, their aesthetic choices and artistic direction are easily identifiable. A great example is Kubrick's choice to shoot Barry Lyndon with as much available light as possible, with certain scenes being lit by candles. This gave the impression of the time period, where swooping handheld shots, slow motion, or neon colors might be jarring. Yet, to achieve this period look, very high-quality lenses with specific attributes had to be used. On the other hand, the visuals of filmmakers like David Lynch, Alejandro Jodorowsky, or Nicholas Winding Refn are more fantastic, surreal, and abstract. The unrealistic elements of perception can be a part of the experience. These choices may or may not be consciously noticed by the audience, but they do have an effect on the movie. The visual aesthetics of a director's choices are not the only important factor in considering sequels, prequels, or franchise films. To me, the in-universe canon is important to take into consideration, since it is important to the existing audience and the logical proceedings of the story. It is part of verisimilitude. It is part of the audience's sublimation into the story. What this all means to you and me in the year of our Lord is that one of the consequences of making a sequel or prequel to a movie from decades before is that the real-world social environment and available technology will have changed substantially. But by the same reality, the style of the franchise itself doesn't have to. Film can be created in the style of many eras, and there's nothing stopping filmmakers from recreating vintage aesthetics. It may not be possible, in every instance, to replicate the look and feel of a film, and thus not please the nostalgic desires of fans. But you should try if your goal is to be consistent and crowd-pleasing. There are deeper reasons than visual as to why The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith are regarded poorly to some and praised by others. Visuals are just the most obvious difference between the original trilogy and the prequels, and the most obviously jarring element of the presentation.
The bar is at the highest when you have live action right on the screen. The audience is watching Liam Neeson, and they've got Jar Jar there. And Liam Neeson is real. And then we have to come up and make ours as real, because if we don't, the audience will pick up on it immediately and say, there's something about that that's not, I don't believe that.
So you're out of the movie.
It looks like Roger Rabbit. You
Yeah.
can't have it be like Roger Rabbit. For 90% of the audience, you have to make it so that they just say, I don't know how they did it, it just was a real character.
Grind us into tiny pieces and blast us into oblivion.
This really is conceived as a 6-part movie, of which episode 1 is the first chapter. And sometimes it's difficult to keep that in mind, that each film, while it's important in itself and relates to what's going on in that film and has to be entertaining in itself, really is fitting into a larger mosaic, and that the whole enterprise won't really be understood, I think, until you can actually sit down and watch all 6 episodes and then follow the story. Because we're dealing in micro stories here. The larger picture is kind of a different story.
You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Careful you must be when sensing the future, Anakin. The fear of loss is a path to the dark side.
I won't let these visions come true, Master Yoda.
Death is a natural part of life. Rejoice for those around you who transform into the Force. Mourn them, do not. Miss them, do not. Attachment leads to jealousy. The shadow of greed, that is.
What must I do, Master Yoda?
Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
It was only a dream.
I won't let this one become real.
All I wanted to do was tell a story of what happened. You know, it started here and it went there. If I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble because they're not going to do what I want them to do. They decided they were going to go do their own thing, and so I decided I will go my way and I'll let them go their way.
What do you go back to when you need to go back to the well?
Right.
Where do you get the nourishment culturally, artistically, intellectually? Where do you get it?
I was taken back in my own youth to the story of Satan taking Christ to the mountain and offering him the kingdoms of the world if only he would turn away from his mission.
Right.
I can't do it, Ben.
You cannot escape your destiny.
Leave me? No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
All those Star Wars.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kid.
I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to sell them off, I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and
It is time for you to let go. I don't want things to change. But you can't stop the change. Will I ever see you again? What does your heart tell you?
it's very easy to create those magical worlds in language. It's very hard to create them in a realistic way on the screen.
And he said, well, why don't you just think about it? And I said, yeah, okay, but there's no way that we can do it with the tools we have. Okay, just think about it. And he walked out. And I thought, well, geez, okay. And I started thinking. And within 15 minutes, I'd figured it out.
When I was young, I had ambitions for something to be brilliant. And when it came less than brilliant, I was very upset about it. I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe it's better that way. The things that have come out that came out exactly the way I wanted them to come out have not been very successful.
You always were the one to show me how.
Leave me? You're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
Back then I couldn't do things that I can do now.
Already.
This thing is slowly taking me apart.
You were right about me.
Gray would be the color if I had a home.
Tell your sister you were right.
Ted, I got your voucher. Out!
There.
I'm sorry about that. I'm so sorry. We'll have him like burned and
I don't even know who that guy is.